Okay, amazing. Thanks everyone for joining us today. Uh, as I mentioned, my name is Mo. I'm one of the co-founders of Morta. I I'm really looking forward to today's session because we're doing something different. So I usually talk, and you will hear me talk. But the goal of today's session is to start getting more practical. Initially, when we joined this community as a whole, a lot of the goal was share know-how to help people build up skills and to help people build up an understanding of these processes. So in the last talk, I shared a lot about our vision, and I'll reiterate some of that today. But the goal of today's session is to have a bit of a crash course in terms of how do we actually go about automating tracking plan versus actual, specifically with a focus on information deliverables. And initially, I was having a think of like how to do the process, and I was speaking with Ralph about the session today. And as part of the work that we're doing with the data governance community more broadly, and we got the idea to actually not just have me on, but to invite a guest in each of these sessions. So today I'm going to be joined by Ralph, who I think all of you, of course, know. I obviously know him from the BIM Heroes community and the BIM Coordinator Summit. But when I initially met Ralph, it was through his work with ARCDOX, which is the BIM consultancy that he founded or co-founded. And they had this concept of a digital plan of work, which relates heavily to a lot of what we'll be talking about today. So I asked him if he wouldn't mind joining us today to effectively share what that process looked like and what they were trying to achieve in that process. And effectively, he's the challenge owner for the day. So he's going to be sharing a process, and I'm then going to have to build something against that process on the platform. And I'm going to have to share how I think around building these things on the platform on the go. Now, what I'm going to do initially is I'm just going to recap quickly what Morta does, just for people who haven't come across us. First, as I mentioned, like really the goal of today's session is to help you automate tracking information deliverables against your plan. What we're going to be trying to go over is first some basics around the process when it comes to planning and tracking, and Ralph is going to be helping a lot with that. We're then going to be talking about database design fundamentals and how you can approach that. We're going to be building a sample tracker on Morta, which is an example of a no-code platform. We're going to learn how to reuse and track against existing data, and we're going to be building sample reports and leveraging APIs effectively within the system. The goal really is going to be to help you automate tracking and reporting to support successful project and design outcomes. Ralph, I think you're with us now.
I hope I am.
Yes, you
are.
I can hear you. Yeah, I can hear you. Amazing. Thanks a lot for joining. No worries at all. If you want to say hi, I was going to give a bit of an overview of I was getting started to give a bit of an overview of what we're doing. But if you can just say hello, and then I'll keep sharing screen for a bit, and then I'll hand over to you in a second.
Okay, sure. Well, thanks for having me on this call. We've had lots of long and interesting discussions about BIM planning and information management. So I'm looking forward to sharing some of those with the community, because I think the work you guys are doing is incredibly important, and love what you're doing. So look forward to the session.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for joining. I'm just going to give an overview of what we're doing, and then I'm going to hand over to you in a second. So I'm just going to take the screen again. So yeah, thanks a lot, Ralph, for joining. So as I mentioned, like the goal, that's the goal of the session today. I think it's also worth noting that our next session is going to focus on asset and Kobe related data collection, planning, and tracking and assurance. It's still being defined because I'm going to be working with the challenge owner on defining what we're going to be doing, but you'll hear more about that. It will definitely though be in the asset and Kobe data related space where we're most likely going to be covering data collection. We're going to look at integrating with Revit. We're going to be looking at reporting in the next session. Now, just to give you a quick overview of what we do for those of you who are not familiar with Morta, I'm seeing a few names on here that are like existing, for example, Morta community members and customers. So it's really good to see some of you here. I hope what I'll do will be beneficial for you, but hopefully it will, generally speaking, be beneficial for everyone. Our goal as a company really is to drive performance by automating tracking with data and by connecting information. And the way we see it is the industry has a range of challenges, from productivity to building safety to handover to carbon to resource use to accountability and trust. They're all challenges that we're looking at resolving as a sector. But in many ways, we see a lot of these as symptoms to a deeper challenge. And the deeper challenge really is poor information planning and tracking, which hampers visibility and performance within the sector. So we have different people within the projects who need answers to questions. Design managers need to understand the progress of design. Information managers need to know the completion of information. Commercial managers need to know if projects are within budget. QA and QC need to understand whether we're following all of the ISO requirements, and sustainability managers need to evidence effectively their certifications, for example. And today we heavily rely, to get answers to any of these questions, we heavily rely on Excel-based trackers and Word-based reports, where we manually go into different systems like common data environments, like Revit, like the project schedule, the scheduling system, and we pull data manually from these systems, and then we take them back into our trackers. The end result is we have a lot of disconnected trackers. We have information that's spread all over. We have inconsistencies in our information, and these things are taking up time. And when they take up time, first, that's a waste for you if you're spending 30% of your time doing these tasks manually, because you could be doing them on higher value adding tasks. But second, it also means that there is less real-time visibility. There is no real-time visibility within the project. So it actually takes time to understand that things are starting to go wrong. And that's really then representative of the risks that are involved. Our goal as a company is over time to help you drive performance by tracking with data. Now, what I'm sharing here is, I would say, a vision for the industry. I'm not saying that we're the only people who do this. A lot of what I'm going to be talking about today can be taken and approached in multiple different ways. So really, the way we see it is the industry needs to move towards connected data that drives tracking and that drives performance. So you should be able to connect these trackers. You should be able to draw on data from existing systems, and you should then be able to derive insight from this data in various contexts. That could be something like a Power BI. It could be like a 3D model. It could be, or a BIM model. It could be GIS. It could even be AI. And by connecting this data, we then ensure that everyone is speaking and singing effectively of the same hymn sheet. We ensure that we're all telling the same story. We all ensure that we are reusing data, and we're consistent in the way that we're looking at things, which then helps us get to better performance within our projects. There are, generally speaking, various ways with which something like this gets approached within the industry. I always say I'm not the first or the last person that will say we should move out of Word and Excel. The first we see is dedicated point solutions. Dedicated point solutions are examples of solutions that have gone, I shouldn't have this on an Excel workbook, or I shouldn't have this on a Word file. I'm going to build a software solution that does that very specifically. There are some things like that in the sustainability space, in the handover space, in the information management space. Challenge with these is they tend to be very rigid. They don't connect well with other systems, and you can't really build on them. You can't customize them, which is in many ways the biggest strength of Excel and Word. The second option is some go, I'm going to be a hardcore coder and I'm going to build my own software solutions. And that the beauty of that is you're building a process that you think is right. But at the same time, that ends up being very expensive. It takes time to build. Very few companies have the resources to actually enable something like that to happen. And then importantly, they end up being siloed as well, and they cannot be changed day on day. The last option, which I think is most interesting personally, is no-code solutions. So if you're seeing things like Notion, Airtable, Coda, Smartsheets, even things like Monday.com, Asana, Trello, they're all examples of these solutions that are saying you should have the power as a professional to build what you think is needed within a project. And I personally think they're the most exciting for the sector because there is no cap on what you can achieve with them. You can build on them, you can solve problems, and you can really take your processes to the next level. The challenge with most of the no-code solutions on the market, though, is so if I had to pick, that's what I would be picking, to be honest, generally as a category. But the challenge with these tend to be they don't speak your language, so you need to figure things out on your own. They're not really set up for project-based collaboration, be it from a pricing perspective or from a permissioning perspective. You need to figure out integrations on your own. You need to figure out what your processes would look like on your own, which ends up being a massive challenge. We see ourselves first and foremost as an example of these no-code solutions, but fundamentally we're trying to bring the best of these three different bubbles that I showed earlier, like at the center of that Venn diagram. So we see ourselves as the only customizable and connected solution for planning and tracking information across the project delivery lifecycle. You move away your trackers and your Word documents into a single web-based hub where you then share the information. The key thing is it's very configurable. You'll be seeing me configure things on the fly today. Let's see how that goes. And you can build on it what you think is right. So I'll have ingredients today, but what I'm going to be building is the digital plan of work that Ralph is going to be talking a bit more about shortly. Because we're building on a system and effectively on a database, there is a lot more data quality and consistency across the different teams. You can reuse data from other systems, and that's one of the things that makes us very different. You connect to things like, it's all well and good that we have a plan, but we want to track against that plan. That's what makes the plan useful. And the work is actually happening in ACC or in any of these other, in Viewpoint, Aconex, Asite, or any of these other systems. So make it very, very easy for you to integrate with these types of systems, leveraging APIs that exist. We're generally working with hundreds of organizations are using the platform day in and day out to drive performance and to track their projects and to plan their deliverables. I think one of the things that makes us really lucky, we're working in 8 different countries. We're working across the different tiers of the supply chain. So within the mix, we know what an owner needs. We know what a multidisciplinary design firm needs, what a main contractor needs, what a specialist and a supply chain member needs. And increasingly, we really want to be backing the supply chain members. We're not just a platform that's focused on let's call them the usual suspects. We're very focused on making digital accessible to everyone. And we do that, be it affordable, but also by supporting people in the way that we can. And we're trying to be as open as we possibly can be. The benefit ends up being There are lots of benefits when it comes to decreasing risk and ensuring compliance, saving time from manual processes, ensuring consistency and standardization, having visibility and insight. And Industry 4.0 readiness is becoming a topic. So if you're thinking about things like AI is only as good as the information that it's fed. If it's going to take me time to collect all of this information, then what's the point of all of this? So really what many companies are starting to see is we're future-proofing their processes and we're enabling them to get into all of that. Now, our most popular use case is, generally speaking, automating tracking for files and information deliverables. So you'll have things like reference data, responsibility matrices, requirements, project controls and commercials, data sets. That connects to master trackers, which is a master information delivery plan, and different teams can see that. And then Morta connects the external solutions to automate tracking. Now, this is my simplified variation of what Ralph will be sharing more in a second. It's how I articulate it. But the fundamentals are, there are requirements. There is a master information delivery plan that defines what needs to go in, and then there is work that is actually delivered, and Morta really helps bring these things together. So what are our goals for today's session? Again, this is the first time I'm doing something like this, so it will not necessarily be perfect. I welcome any feedback on how we can make this more and more useful. I'm open to ideas. Please do reach out to me. My email is mo@morta.io if you don't have my email. Book a session with me. If you go on our website, you can book a session with me. Just please do reach out. The goal is to make this educational. I really believe what I'm sharing. Yes, obviously, I'm the founder of Morta, and I am going to be putting out Morta as a tool in order for you to try it out and use it and learn with it. But I really believe that a lot of the concepts that we're going to be talking about today can apply in various ways. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to be sharing a process for planning and tracking information. Thank you, Ralph. He's going to be talking us through the digital plan of work and what that intends to do. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to start highlighting and introducing key database principles. And these principles, whether you're going to use an SQL server, which is like going very hardcore, Microsoft Access, or whether you're going to use something like an Airtable, or whether you choose something like Morta, I think these concepts apply. So we have things like tables. Tables have records. Each of them should be a unique value and should be a unique record within that table. We have data types. So a column can be a date, it can be an attachment, it can be a checkbox, it can be a select list. Every one of these things is a data type, and we're going to be exploring these in action within the session. We can validate data, so we can put things like rules around the database to go, this should not be a duplicate value. This should not be a blank value. This should meet a specific convention using things like regular expressions. And you can do that type of thing. Ultimately, a lot of the premise here is around relational databases, is generally a lot of, especially when we're looking at the structured data side of Morta, a lot of it is around that. So we're going to be exploring lookups and select lists and as ways to build relationships. If you're into things like SQL, or you're sometimes that can be called a join, and I'm going to be sharing a bit more about that. Then we're going to talk a bit about views. A view is, you'll see an example of that, but a TIDP is an example, or a task information delivery plan is an example of a view of an information delivery plan. So a table should have all of the information rather than it being split into many different sheets, and then different people can see different portions of that data within their respective views. And then the last thing we'll discuss briefly today is APIs and integrations and what they can do for you. As I'm saying, like, I'm someone who has, I'm the least technical person in our whole team, but I have gone through some of these foundational principles in terms of like computer science courses and database courses and so on and so forth. So I've developed this know-how off the back of that. I still don't think I'm going to nail today explaining these concepts. And today I will be gravitating more towards the platform itself, but as a way to lean in on explaining these concepts. But my hopes is as I'm getting questions, as I'm getting into this mindset month on month in the workshops we're going to be doing, I'm going to be having a slide on what is a table, what is a data type, what are data validations, what are relationships. But I really wanted to get going, and that's the point of today's session. And then finally, I'm going to be implementing a live working solution to the challenge set by Rolf. So with that, I'll hand over to Rolf. Thank you very much, Rolf, for joining us today.
Thank you, Mo. Really interesting things there, and I think it feeds perfectly into what the challenge, I suppose, that I want to set. You can see by all the gray hair that I have, I've been in the business for a long time. And, you know, as an architect, if I go back many years when we were still producing information with pens and pencils and rulers and paper, we used to plan our work through something called a document register. You know, so if we were starting a project, we would make a list basically of what we thought we would need to produce in relation to this project, and you know, that would be a list of drawings, specifications, you know, and then also we would make a list of things we would need from other people. So, for instance, we would need from the contractor product data sheets of all the final products that were selected, etc. So, you know, it's something. It's like a lot of people think what we're doing in ISO 19650 is completely new, but it's actually a good project management practice that we've used as a profession for many years. It's just given a different name, you know. But I would say my experience with the industry over the years is that we're very good at doing stuff, but we're not very good at planning stuff. So when you get a job, people are very eager just to start working, you know, get straight into it and start producing information. And then they only ask questions later, like, is the information useful? Is it correct? Is it fulfill its purpose, etc.? And then, of course, the answer is usually no. And then you start revising the work and start fixing it. So I think one of the key ideas that came out of ISO 9001 in quality management is this idea of plan, do, check, act. You know, so that before you do any work, you should plan as carefully as you can what it is you're going to do. And then you do the work, and then you check the work against the plan. And if it doesn't meet the plan, then obviously you act, you correct it, etc. And I mean, it seems to me, just working with companies in you know, more recently, is that people have kind of forgotten this basic principle and importance of planning their work. And you know, so therefore we spend a lot of time reworking and revising information, and it's, as you said in your introduction, it slows the whole process down, and it creates endless amounts of problems in our industry. Yeah. So the digital plan of work, that was just to give some context for us. When we start working on BIM projects, which to me is a project that's using a digital process, we try as much as we can to plan what's going to be delivered. You know, what information is going to be delivered, when is it going to be delivered, who's going to deliver it, you know, and then we try and do that as much of that as we can before we get started. Now, of course, projects are very iterative. So at the beginning of a project, when you haven't even started the design, it's very difficult to say completely what you're going to need. So you have to develop an outline plan at the beginning, and then you have to keep revising that plan as you explore the design and develop the design and go through the project. So that's the first thing I would say is the plan is always changing. It's not a fixed thing, and that means we need a very careful way of managing that plan. And then, of course, as people are working, we need to check that they're delivering against the plan. So I see the plan as a checklist, and that's what I really like about the Morta solution and the API connection to CDE environments is that if we have the plan, we can, as documents are being delivered to the CDE, they can be checked off against the plan. And that's what you described as tracking. And so you're constantly tracking progress in an almost real-time way for the project. And so the digital plan of work for us is a very important piece. I would say the digital plan of work is a subset of the BIM execution plan. So the BIM execution plan for us is a combination of narrative text, which explains the standard methods and procedures that the project team are going to use. So those are descriptive. A lot of that is descriptive text saying, this will be done in this way, it will use this standard, etc. But then part of the BIM execution plan is a series of lists. So a list of the participants, for instance, that are going to engage in the project, their role for various stages, their the elements of work that they're going to be working on, etc. So when we started looking at this ourselves before we spoke to you guys, we thought, well, if we could take the list elements out of the BIM execution plan rather than having it in a Word document, and we could have them in tables in Excel, then we could manage all those lists in a more comprehensive way and keep it organized throughout the project. And so we built an Excel tool basically to do that for ourselves and our projects, and we called it the Digital Plan of Work tool. And I mean, the tool basically at the end of the day creates the MIDP, which is the Master Information Delivery Plan, which, as everyone knows, if you're following ISO 19650, is really just the collection of TIDPs. So there's no difference between an MIDP and TIDP, only that the TIDP is a filtered list, or as you described earlier, view of the MIDP. And then once we have the MIDP, we can use that to track the files that are arriving into the CDE. Okay, so that's the theory of it. But I suppose that the question everybody asks is, well, how do I start making this list? Because it's a big task, because on a project, you could have 6,000 files. So where do you start? And so the diagram on the right-hand side of this image is the way we think about it. So overall, you start at the very top and you say, well, we have project information requirements. In other words, we have information that describes the scope of the project, the cost, or the budget. We have information to deal with program or time. There's various statutory approvals we have to make for planning, building control, fire, etc. There's health and safety requirements in terms of building up the building logbook or safety file, as depending what country you work in. And then there's environmental. And so a lot of that's repeating what you said, is that we have all these different needs of information. So those are the project information needs. Those translate into tasks. So those are various tasks that have to be carried out by certain people. Those tasks are assigned to roles, which are participants in the project. In order to fulfill the task, those roles have to produce some documents or files. Okay. And then those files will be listed on the MIDP and eventually would end up in the CDE. But then I suppose the question is, well, what documents do we need? And so in order to answer that question, you have to look at the project and divide it up into its elements and say, well, the structural foundations is an element that has to be looked at by the structure engineer. The envelope is an architectural element that has to be looked at by the architect. The building services, is an element. And so if you go to the very far right-hand side of this diagram, we use the Uniclass hierarchy. So we started the complex level, which is, let's say, the type of project, and then we look at the main entities that make up that project. We break down into the elements, eventually the systems and products. And of course, at the beginning, you don't know all the products that are going to be involved in the project because you haven't designed it yet, but you probably know at the very start what type of building it is and what the primary elements are probably going to be. So you can begin to assign responsibility of those to certain people in the responsibility matrix, or the RACI, as ISO 9650 describes it. And then you can look at each element and say, well, what documents do we need? So for the structural foundations, we're going to need a foundation plan. We're probably going to need some sections, and we're going to need some details, and we're going to need some specifications of the various materials that make up the foundations. And for each of the materials, we're going to eventually need a technical submittal of product data, etc. So looking at those two things, so almost approaching it from two angles, we can get to a final list of documents. We can list them in the MIDP, and then we can track the progress of that in the CDE. And so to make this easy for ourselves, we made this little Excel tool. Now, I'm not promoting Excel, but it was just quick and cheap and easy for people that we're working on. Basically, you would click a button, and it would ask you to put up information about the project. The most important part is the code.
When did you do this? When did you do, like, what year did you do this in? When you started doing this, yeah.
Oh, must be 3 or 4 years ago, 5 years ago. I don't know. I can't actually remember. It's been a long time. Yeah, but for the document naming, obviously the code is important. But we also want to know other information about the project, and you can record that in this. Then, of course, we have the participants. So every company needs a code for the document naming, but we also want to know certain things about that company. So we can record that. Obviously, the people, Joe Bloggs is a person that will have to action certain tasks. So we need to keep a record of the people. There's various stages in Ireland and the UK. We follow stages 1 to 7, but could be different in other countries. We have the roles, because we have to assign tasks and documents to various roles. So the architect is a role, and that's the code used in the file naming. But we want to know what that code means. And what we also wanted to do is begin to link that to Uniclass, and so that we could just make that connection once, and people didn't have to think about it every time. Then, in terms of file naming, we also want to define the volumes and systems. So we have, the lists of those, and we have codes for those, and you can assign the Uniclass to that. And then, of course, the document types, whether it's a drawing or a model or a specification, etc. Each document type has a code, but then there's also the explanation of that type and the Uniclass code for that. So that connection is all made once. And of course, now that you have all the codes, we can start to make up our MIDP, which is a very complex list of documents. But each document, as you can see, the first document there has those codes assigned to the file name. So it has a project code, a originator code, etc. But those codes have already been defined in the previous lists I showed you. So people don't have to make up those codes. They just use what's there. And if you want, you can either just add lots of documents in the spreadsheet, or you can actually click on any document and look at the meaning of all the codes, just to make sure that it's what you want. We also you can start putting some project management information to the documents, like what stage do we need it, what date do we need it, etc. Who the author is going to be in terms of approving it and checking it. So you can begin to assign some tasks to each document. But that's the output. But I suppose the reason we did it this way is because if I give people a template like the one we're looking at now, which has like 20 columns and 500 rows, and we say, can you please fill that out? That's a very daunting task for somebody to do, to process. Whereas if I say to somebody, just give me your company name, code, and address for starters, and then give me the name of the people who are going to work on your project, and then tell me which role you're performing. It's by presenting the same information in little chunks, it just makes it easier for some people. I'm not saying some people are quite used to working in big tables. Other people are more used to working in sort of easy dialogue boxes like this. So it's more like a website. And so we were trying to make it as easy as possible. In one of our previous conversations, Mo, I mentioned a study I looked at. It was done in 1956 by a guy called George Miller, but he basically said that the human mind can only hold 7 + 2 or -2 bits of information at any one time. So either 5 or 9, between 5 and 9 pieces of information. And that's why, like if you look at credit card numbers, that's why they split it up into 4 sections, because a person can't actually process a whole number in like that in one go. So by breaking it into sections, you make it easier. Or even phone numbers. That's why phone numbers are always broken up into sections. So that was the idea, is to break effectively what is all the complexity of an MIDP into little tasks. I mean, there's other features we have. So for instance, the task one is we could actually begin to do some project management tasks related to scope or project statutory approvals, etc. And we can actually we can begin to connect sets of documents specifically to the task. And that, I suppose, as an innovation, one of the things we introduced in this plan of work is I don't like the idea of folders in CDEs, because the difficulty with folders is that one document could end up being in 5 or 6 folders. And if you're using folders, you have to copy the document 5 times. And then if the document gets updated, you have to go and remember to update the document in the 5 folders. And I think the metadata put on the file through ISO 19650 almost eliminates the need for folders. But of course, people still like to look at groups of documents, like small subsets of documents, and say, well, for the planning application, I need these 10 documents. For the building control application, I need these 15 documents. For the health and safety, I need this. So these are like subsets of documents, which it's not quite a TIDP, because a TIDP relates only to one task, and it's not the MIDP, because the MIDP is everything. It's somewhere in between, like a mini TIDP or mini MIDP, and so we call that document sets. So we created this idea of you could create a document set, and then you could look at the that's finding the you could get a list of all the documents in your MIDP, and you could just add 6 or 7 of those documents to the document set. So you're not actually replicating the document, you're just creating another list, if you like, of a mini list of documents that relate specifically to a task. And in terms of the responsibility matrix, I suppose the innovation we created here was this idea of thinking about buildings, going back to my diagram there, of breaking buildings down into elements, systems, products in a kind of a tree structure. So instead of looking at a whole Reiki matrix with 1,000 elements on it, which is confusing, you could zoom in. You could say, well, we only want to think about the walls. That's an element. What systems do we have in the wall, and what products do we have in the wall, in that wall system? And so you can focus the discussion on a particular thing. And again, this is just to make the human mind able to I mean, there's many ways of doing that. I mean, you could filter lists, etc. But we found this kind of tree structure very helpful for people, because let's say you're the structure engineer, like you're only interested in the substructure. You're not interested in the sort of the envelope elements, because that's the architect's problem. So you could just focus on the substructure, and you can begin to add your deliverables, your systems and products to your structure element. So that was a quick overview of the digital planner work. Excel, it's nice as Excel. It's quick, easy, cheap, but there's some downsides of Excel. One is it's a file, so trying to get people to collaborate on one file is quite difficult. We have to save the file to OneDrive. Everybody has to have a full version of Microsoft Excel, because it uses macros, and of course there's very little control on the file, and there's a big chance that somebody's going to screw it up. And so we really liked the idea about doing the same thing in an online platform like Morta, where things are more controlled and more accessible to everybody in general, maybe people who don't have Excel. So I don't know, is that enough of an
perfect.
overview?
Perfect. Thanks a lot for sharing that, Ralph. I mean, I'm sure it's been really good to see within the comments, like people commenting already on they have a similar process effectively that they've developed. I think what I've always really liked about the digital plan of work and like the work that you're doing here is you're really trying to bring the pieces of the puzzle together to tell a more holistic story for planning. And that's what I think is very, very interesting about that. So I'm really, really glad that I invited you to join us for this, because I think it is important for people to have a look at the process and the various ways that the process can be achieved. So thanks a lot for sharing that, Rob. What I'm going to do is I'm going to now attempt to build. I probably won't be able to do all of it, and I'm not necessarily aiming to do all of it, but to show you how I would do that on a database. And I'm going to be using Morta, of course, as the tool to demonstrate that. And I'm just going to walk you through the thinking of that with the ingredients that we have within the platform. From my end, the way I think about it, there are 3 or so challenges with Excel. I think just one last thing that I think is important is this is what we've just seen as, I think, one of the most advanced. There's probably one other Excel that I've seen from a tier 1 that is on a similar level to what Ralph just demonstrated. So I think this is the most advanced implementations I have seen on Excel and someone trying to get it done. And even with all of that, there are various challenges, right? It's not necessarily easy for 50 different supply chain members to collaborate with each other on this type of like in an Excel file. There will still be challenges when it comes to data consistency, but I think the most important thing of all is it's a silo on its own. So it's disconnected from every other Word file that has to be created, and the CDE and the the various systems effectively that it should ideally interact with. Because the moment we call it the digital plan of work, it's at the center of the work. And in an ideal world, this plan of work gets turned into a control mechanism for the whole project. And I think that's where a silo like Excel becomes a challenge in many ways. So I'm going to be trying to demonstrate some of these things throughout the session now. And yeah, thanks again a lot, Ralph, for that. Throughout, I'll be building some things. I'll be asking you where you think we're at. So just
yeah, sure. Well, I'll put my camera and microphone
commentary.
off while you're talking. But if you ask a question, I'll just switch it on again.
Sure, awesome. Thanks a lot again. Okay, perfect. So again, guys, I've not done something like this. Again, I'm seeing some of our community members here. Obviously I build and I demonstrate and so on and so forth, but this is kind of taking it up a notch. So what I'm going to do first is just for people who are not aware of Morta and like how you get on the system. All you do is I had put our website at the beginning. It's morta.io. What you can do is sign in. By default, anyways, there is a 30-day free trial if you're on our website. Unfortunately, my face will pop up. And you can click sign in. When you do, I personally sign in with Google. For those of you who are in like specific companies, you may want to sign in. You may want to sign in with Microsoft, but you need to double check. Like, I wouldn't do that initially because like that needs IT whitelisting and so on and so forth. So you can just sign up with your email, and then you can get on the system. By default, there's a 30-day free trial where and then we can, if you're looking at using the system, like we can explore that like further with you. We are exploring a free plan for individuals. So like get in touch if you're an individual that wants to use it on a limited basis. Like we can see what we can potentially do there. But effectively, all you need to do is you sign in with Google. Sorry, one second. I need to do my authentication because that is how my account is set up. I signed in with Google. Obviously, you wouldn't if you're not using Google. I then get on the platform. Obviously, you would have gone through a sign-up process, and then you go from there. Now, when I got on the platform, I generally have a list of hubs. I have way too many. You won't have as much. All you need to do is to create a new hub. When you create a new hub, you can give it a name. So I'm just going to go BIM Heroes in a digital plan of work. And I'm going to create this hub. Now, when I create a hub, effectively, I can see a few things. So first, I can see that it has a hub homepage. You can see on the left-hand side, I have a sidebar. You can see I have an icon that looks like a document, and then I have an icon that looks like a grid, a table. So in many ways, we're trying to bring the best of both Word and Excel. Like we don't think it's just text, and we don't think it's just tables. Both need to exist, and they need to work cohesively with each other. And you can see in any of these documents, you can play around, so you can add sections and so on and so forth. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be renaming this to Digital Plan of Work. And the first thing that I want to do is I'm just going to write some text. This is going to be a demonstrator for the Digital Plan of Work. What I also want to do is I want to have an image of the what Ralph was just showcasing. So I'm just gonna open this up, and then I had taken this off the YouTube, even though I have like there are better like versions of this elsewhere. Now, what I could do then is I could have the different sections that I'm going to want. I'm not going to do that now. I'll be coming back to that in a second. It's important when you're writing any of these texts, like you can format and you can do various things. Now, if you ask me, the document side is cool. A lot of the magic happens in the tables and in being able to reuse the tables and the structured data effectively within the context of the document. So we're going to be talking a lot more about that in a second. So if I were to click on a table, you can very quickly see it just has example columns. I can edit columns. I can make changes. Just a few basics. Earlier, I was mentioning things like, first, I mentioned the table. This is a table. I mentioned the concept of records and unique identifiers. You can see I can add different rows, and every one of these rows would be a record on its own, and I can look at it in a record format if I were to expand a row. I also mentioned things like data types, and we're going to be exploring a lot more of that in a second. But fundamentally, I can take any of these columns, and I can edit the columns. So I can call this a attachment, for example, and then I can give it a data type. And this is one of the biggest and most important things when you start thinking of proper databases. Every one of these columns has a data type. So in Excel, they're usually more formatting oriented. It's not necessarily genuinely that the type is actually being enforced. It's much more of a formatting thing. Whereas here, within Morta, within something like SQL, within Access, within any of the things like Airtable, Notion, even when I know some people, Ralph used the word list earlier. I know some people explore SharePoint lists, because lists, again, starts getting us at this concept of there is a proper data type within any of these things. So you can define it to be a checkbox, you can define it to be a date, you can define it to be a URL, a number, a percentage, a phone, a select list. Tag is something that's unique to Morta, we'll talk about later. You can define text, which is what we have now. You can define a URL, you can define a variable, and you can, variable is also unique to Morta. And then you can define a vote column, which is a more dynamic column that I don't think we'll explore today, but you can see in time. But the principle fundamentally is there are these data types, and I can actually control what's going in. So if I were to take something like dates, I can then come in. I know I called it attachment, but let's forget that for a second. I can now set what I'm entering into the platform. If I were to take something like an attachment, I can do that as well. And I can then attach files to that, and so on and so forth. Now, that's just a bit on basic things that I think are worth noting. Now, before I got started, one of the things I learned, we used to just like do things and keep them ugly, but we've started focusing more and more about making these things look nice. So we have the option within the platform for anyone to style the platform. So I can give it a specific color. I'm just taking the Heroes colors. I want my documents to have a specific format. I can define my heading styles because I want them to have a specific style. So if we just take, this is going to be a funny one, like a yellow or an orange, because that's also one of the other colors that's there. And then what I can do is, we added the default date format on a project level. So we can then define a banner for any of these documents. That's just a default banner. And we've just made one here for BIM Heroes. And then you can see now, if I go into my document, it's and my hub, it's starting to just look my own. I can do these things quickly. There's a lot more that you can explore. I think the one that I just want to do before I forget is I also want to have a default color for all of my tables, and that will then make things look a bit neater as well. So now you can see I have this here, and then I can work with that. I just want to check, why did this not? Well, we'll come back to this. Okay, amazing. Now what we want to do is we want to start building the digital plan of work. Now, to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to leverage our templates. By the way, if you have any questions, please do drop them into the chat. I am reading the questions on the go, and I'm reading the commentary. So I want this to be interactive to the extent possible. So please do drop any questions that you have. Now, one of the things that Ralph said is the digital plan of work is a subset of a BIM execution plan. I would agree with that. There's a lot in the BIM execution plan that is relevant to the digital plan of work. It's a combination of that, things like the MIDP, some of the things like detailed responsibility matrices, like some could have it within their BIM execution plan, some may have it as a separate resource. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take our templates as a starting point. And you can see when I open this up, I have a range of templates. The first one that I know I'm going to need is my information delivery planning related templates. I am going to use this template. I'm also going to load another template, which is going to be my BIM execution plan one. And do I want anything else? I'll just add those for the time being. Now, you can see here what's happened is I have a BIM execution plan, I have a digital plan of work, I have my information delivery plan. I want to order these things. So I'm just going to go, this is 0, this is 1, and then this is 2. There are various ways that you can order. I'm not going to overly fixate on that now. But I now have my things in order. Now, let's start looking at some of the things that are within here. If we look at the BIM execution plan, I really liked something that Ralph said, which is they focused on the tables. If you ask me personally, many documents have way too much text when the most important bit, in my opinion, is the tables. And if we can cut down some of the text, I think the industry would be better for it. So when we're building a lot of our templates, what we generally speaking do is we focus on the table side of things in order to help you better structure your data, because really that's the core goal of everything that we're trying to achieve within the platform. So you can see here I have various sections. The first section that I have is project details and scope. Within that, I can add a narrative. So I can go, this is my project. This is my project and the scope of this project. I can add information, I can highlight, yada, yada. We have a section called approach the meeting, the EIR. So sometimes you'll have different sections within the EIR. What I can do is I can start filling these out. I then have a section for information delivery milestones. Now, information delivery milestones, if you remember, Ralph did have a section on stages. So this is the table that we're going to be using for that specific section. We have a project delivery team. So that's who are the organizations that are going to be involved in doing a lot of this. We have purposes and objectives. And one of the things that Ralph was talking about earlier is the needs that different people, the different information needs. So again, this is something that we can adjust in a second. We have an information management function. We're not going to need that today, but the information management function just has the roles and responsibilities and the tasks in many ways that are associated with information management. We have an information standard. I have different reference data sets within that, like my functional breakdowns, my disciplines, and so on and so forth. And then we have the last one is software, hardware, and IT, and there are two sections that should not be here, and we will clean out of the template. So you can see I can very easily delete sections. I can remove sections. So let's say we don't care about software, hardware, and IT. We can remove that. Let's say we don't want to have the section around approach to meeting the EIR. We can remove that. I've seen a comment from Pierre on UI and UX being important. 100% agree. It's one of the things that I think we didn't initially focus on as a company because we're really focusing on the foundations. But over time, we've been focusing more and more on that based on the feedback that we've been getting from the community. Now, you can see here I have originator. This is my information delivery plan. So this is my second document that I have here. The information delivery plan itself, you can see I call it an information delivery plan, and this is a master information delivery plan. We're going to be going into this at more length in a second, but I just want to start introducing some concepts, and I will come back to them again. The end result that we were looking at with Rolf is the master information delivery plan. The master information delivery plan, as we all know, is made up of the task information delivery plans that are created by different originators or by different disciplines. There is a distinction to be made between the two, like especially if you're a main contractor, you'll generally speaking be creating your task information delivery plans off the back of who are the originators. If you are a lead design firm, like a multidisciplinary design firm, for example, you'll often do that by discipline or by role, for example. But to just illustrate the concept, what you often have in Excel is every task information delivery plan is either a separate file or it's a separate sheet on Excel, because I want my architects or that specific originator to only see things that are relevant to them. And going back to the point that Ralph was making earlier, it's overwhelming to see all of these tables as a whole. So that's why we end up splitting them up into many different trackers and into many different tables. But that ends up causing a challenge, because the first thing is I then need to be aggregating all of this information continuously. In many ways, a task like an information delivery plan should be a live representation of the plan. If I'm having to do that continuously, that becomes insanely challenging. But then the other thing is I'll have reference data sets and a lot of these values and so on and so forth. And I end up needing to update every single one of my Excel files and so on and so forth. There is another point to note we did a study with one of our clients here at some point, and we took a 4-year project where I cannot remember the number of supply chain members, but I think it was in the range of, let's say, 100 supply chain members on like a very large job. And on the basis of updating the task information delivery plans once a month for that project, we calculated that they would have, and we then checked in the CDE, and there's in the order of 4,000 task information instances of task information delivery plans that are created across the project between the periodic updates and the number of supply chain members that have to submit all of these. So in a database, we wouldn't need that because these things would not be split up into many different files. What would happen is everything is effectively happening in a single environment that is live. But what becomes important is splitting it up into different views. Because if you think about it, a task information delivery plan is a view of the wider information delivery plan. So a master information delivery plan has all of my information across all of my different task teams or my different originators. A task information delivery plan has the information that I would have that is directly relevant for one originator. So if I were to filter on my architect, for example, I'm now looking at a subset of my data that is only relevant for that architect. So what I can do here is I can filter. I may also want in a view, I may want to have slightly different columns. I may want to have a different order for my columns, for example. So I may say, I want my file name to come last, and I want my description to be after these, because I'm going to want them to enter the project code, spatial breakdown, functional breakdown, and so on and so forth. So what I can then do is I can save this as a view. And now what I have is a view here, which is TIDP architect, right? And this only focuses on this specific data set. Now, equally, I'm going to want another one for my civil team. So I've just filtered on civil. I've saved this as a new view. And I'm going to confirm, and I'm going to save this. Now, I'm going to call this civil. I'm not going to do this for every one of them, and later on I will be introducing a concept of dynamic views, but first I want to make sure that people understand what the concept of views is. So now I have a default view. My default view is flat. It's just a flat table. I have another view, which is called my master view. In my master view, I want it to be grouped by originator. I have a third view, which is the architect's view. So the architect would only see this subsection of the table because it's pre-filtered on a specific condition. So it's a specific view of the data that exists. The civil will only see the things that they have for civil. Now, if I update the value here...
Can I make a comment, Mo?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, just as you're describing it there, like in BIM, when let's say you're working in ARCICAD or Revit or whatever, you have the model, you create the model, which is like the main database. And then when you take a plan view or a section view or an elevation view of the model, it's the same idea. Like the overall data table is like the model, and then the views are just like the sheets almost. Just as an analogy, I thought that might be helpful for some people.
I love that. It is. I love the fact that you said that because, in many ways, in BIM or in information management, we had these drawings that were a 2D view of things, and then we moved to the models, and we're saying different views, drawings, and so on and so forth now come out of the model. This is exactly the equivalent of that. So I moved to a database. The database is effectively three-dimensional. And then I have, well, it's not actually like it's not 3D. It's like infinite dimensions if you think about it.
Well, it isn't an information model, which is actually technically exactly. It's the right term.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So an information model isn't always geometric. It can be data. Could be.
What I was because I said 3D and that's where I made a mistake. But exactly, it is an information or a data model, and then I can take different dimensions out of that in many ways, and that's the different view. And there is no limit on how many of these. And again, if you start looking in the information management world, that's why there is this flip from we're going to talk about 5D, 6D, whatever, all of these things. We're now just going to talk about what is the purpose of the information and what am I going to be using it at, how am I going to be using it. So yeah, I 100% agree that analogy, and I'll actually tried to make it like several times in the past. Now, what happens then is I'm working here and someone else is working in a different, what's it called? You see, I've just changed this value. I can then go into my master and that same value has changed here because everyone is actually working on the same data source. They're just seeing different parts of that data source. Now, the second thing that I think is very important, and again, I'm spending some time on this. I don't think I ever spend this much time in like my when I'm onboarding people on Morta or like so on and so forth. I'm actually just trying to get to grips with what is a view, what are some of these key principles that enable all of this? And again, like Google a view, you'll find view is a concept in Fabric. You'll find it in Power BI. You'll find it in SQL Server. You'll find it in Airtable. Like it is a general database concept in many ways that just exists and is, I think, is worth understanding and being aware of. Now, the second thing that becomes relevant is this concept of relationships. So we see here, we have spatial breakdown, functional breakdown, form, discipline. Now, you see these are already select lists, right? But we've also seen that we have this information in the BIM execution plan earlier. So if I go here, I have a list of spatial breakdowns, okay? I'm just gonna add another spatial breakdown for a second. Someone in the chat asked around, I think David asked whether data can be imported from Excel and from other systems. There are various ways of getting data in, but let's say if we were to take something like a stage code, I could be downloading this into a CSV file and I could import it in because I already have all of that data in Excel somewhere and I want to bring it in. If it's a CAFM system, we can link to it via API. I won't go into that in detail, but for the time being, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be doing this manual. I'm entering it directly into here as values go. Now, the key thing is I now have XX, ZZ, and YY. If I go into something like if I go back to my information delivery plan, and sorry, did I change which one of the two did I change? I changed my spatial breakdown. Yes, okay, let's go back here. Now, if I look at this, I only have ZZ and XX. And the reason for this is there is in our templates when we build them, the Lego blocks, we don't build the relationships with all of the other data sets. Like you can then do that yourself so that you have an understanding of a lot of these relationships. But you can see here, because this is a type select, what I can do is I can click show. I can build a relationship between this and that table there. So I'm going to pick the spatial breakdown table. I'm going to pick the default view. And what I want to be picking from is my spatial breakdown code. And I want to keep this value up to date. So now what you'll see is something weird. I know why this is happening. True. Okay, amazing. So now when I open this, I see XX, YY, and ZZ, right? So if I were to change this to YY and change this to YY, the values. If I now go back to my BIM execution plan and I change my value, first I'm going to add a new value. I'm going to say MM. And I'm just going to add description 1, description 2, and description 3, and description 4 because of what I'm going to also do next. And actually, I don't feel like YY being YX. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change it to YX. This is obviously, there is much more structure to how these codes happen, but it's just to illustrate a concept. I'm now going back to my information delivery plan. Notice where I had YY, the values have already updated. And the reason for that is we had built a relationship here and we said keep values up to date. So we now have a relationship with that other table. If you think about it, again, another like database concept is this is a foreign key. And I'm saying this foreign key is then related to my value there in that other table. So I now have a relationship between these two different values. It's very similar, obviously, like to what you'd see in a pick list, but this is one example of a data relationship that I may have. Now, and because we added another value, we see MM has now popped up, and I can add MM into any of this. The second key concept when it comes to relationships. So if you see database diagrams, usually there is a table, and from that table I then have an arrow. So I would have my information delivery plan. It would have an arrow back to my functional breakdown table, to my spatial breakdown table, and so on and so forth. It's usually called an entity relationship diagram. For the next session, I'll try to demonstrate what entity relationship diagrams look like, and I'll be trying to write a write-up like of this over time to illustrate a lot of these concepts. Now, the next thing that I want to do is, okay, I've built a relationship between my spatial breakdown and my information delivery plan. Sorry, it's getting hot in here. And I want to pull my description values into this so that I don't have to re-enter the information. If you've used Excel, there is something called VLOOKUPs. The challenge with VLOOKUPs is you're doing it on a cell-by-cell level. So if you add new rows, it will not pick up the VLOOKUPs. In SQL, which is like one of the OG databases, well, actually there's something called FoxPro, which like massively predates that. There is something called joins. And a join is basically a relationship between one table and another. So because we want to make this, we can be geeky at times. So we initially called it joins, but we've since renamed it to table lookups. And all that a lookup is it's saying, I have this table. I want to pull information from another table based on a condition. So I can come and I can add a lookup. So what I can do is I can call this, what am I trying to do? Spatial breakdown. Keep insisting it's stage that I'm going for, which isn't. I'm then I've picked a view from the spatial breakdown. And then I want see, I did it again. I picked my spatial breakdown type. Because it's a select list, the system or from that table, it already knows to build a relationship there. So what it's telling me is I'm picking up the spatial breakdown code when the column in that other table matches that same value. And then I can pick one-to-many configuration or not. Let's ignore that for now. And then I can say, what column do I want to retrieve? In this case, I want the spatial breakdown description. And I'm going to save lookup. So now you see what it's done is I now have this column that I cannot edit, is locked, and I cannot unlock because it's being looked up from another table. So that's lookup. So I just want to pause for a second. I want to, actually, I'll just do one last thing. Because it's a lookup, if I were to go into my spatial breakdown, I really don't know why I keep forgetting spatial breakdown. And I rename this to description M. And I go back to my information delivery plans. Did I even have anything with M? Yes, I did. If I didn't know if I did, I could add a filter and I could go, what do I have on MM? And now I can see I only have one row for MM. Cool. So let's recap a few concepts we've gone over. The first concept that we went over was every one of these tables has a set of rows. And ideally, these should be unique records. If I wanted to, I'll go into unique records in a second because another concept just came up to my mind. The second concept is each of these has a data type. We've explored two data types here. The first is text, so I can add any text that I want. The second is select lists. Select lists are an example of a way with which I can build a relationship with other data sets. And if I were to update that value that I had in my BIM execution plan, that then updates here. The second form of relationships is lookups, which is an extension of joins or VLOOKUPs that you would see. And I can be picking up, automatically entering data into a table based on data that I have elsewhere using lookups. Now, one last one that I quickly want to go over before I continue building the digital plan of work itself. I want to define a rule here for data validations. So I mentioned earlier, I can validate my data, and I can do that in various ways. If it's a text field, I can define something called regular expressions, and I may show you a regular expression in a second, if I'm gutsy. I can then do a validation message, but I can define basic rules that don't need any code within the platform. I can say I don't want to duplicate values, for example, and I can say I don't want blank values if I wanted to. So you can see, I'm just gonna do this one. I'm going to say I don't want to have any blank values here. So now you see if I delete my value, it gives me feedback on the quality of my data. It's highlighting here that I have duplicate values and so on and so forth. Now, awesome. So I'm just gonna, I want to make sure that I've done this right. So let's just recap some things. We mentioned tables and records. You can see how we touched on that. We mentioned data types. You can see how we touched on that. So, and we will be doing that a bit more in a second if we have time. Data validations, we've just briefly gone over that. Relationships between data, I can do that type of thing. And then, and we talked about selects and lookups. And then views obviously has been a very key concept in everything that we've been discussing. Now, the last thing, just because I really want to, I'm going to because my chat GPT has all kinds of things. I'm just gonna open up something and let's do this on the spot together, even though I have genuinely not planned for this. Give me a regular expression for 2-character string. There are various ways that you can do that. After getting ChatGPT, I think it becomes the easiest way to do that. So what I want, the reason I'm saying this is I want to make a data validation rule. I have never done this. I want to do a data validation rule for my spatial breakdowns. And I want this to be a text validation so that it's a two characters. So now you should, what if happen if I enter CCC? Oh, it worked. You can see that gave me an error because it didn't meet that condition. And I can add all of these types of rules for file names, for my role, for my asset name, if I have an asset name, and so on and so forth. But I hope you're seeing these concepts of validations and how that works. Again, I think there are a combination of things that we're baking in as a system. But regular expressions isn't like unique to Morta. It's just something that's out there, and it's a language that's out there, and you can use it to define rules effectively when it comes to data. Awesome. Now,
could we arrange that the computer gives you an electric shock if you try and do something wrong?
and that would be getting a lot of people electrocuted. It can though actually do close to that, which is it can say block data entry. And I think now if I enter this, again, I haven't necessarily, it doesn't let me enter it. So that's closer to electrocuting you. So you could go soft and give people feedback on what they're doing. You could literally block it to begin with if it doesn't meet certain conditions. Amazing. I'm just gonna have a sip of water. All right, I'm getting my thoughts for a second because I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to do next. I think I want to do two things. First, I just want to explore when we say APIs and integrations, what does that mean? I'm going to do that very, very quickly. I'm then going to go from there into doing trying to put together the plan of work. It will be incomplete right now because I've just spent a lot of time going over these types of concepts. Again, some of the planning for this hasn't been perfect. I really just wanted to do it. I really wanted to start like getting into like I like throwing myself into the deep end sometimes and like figuring these things out. So I really hope people are finding use from what I've just done. If you haven't, please send me that feedback so that I do not I'm gonna try not to be covering these every single time because hopefully once I've covered them once it becomes quicker, but I will be trying to do them in application to the concept and the challenge of the week. So today we're talking about information delivery planning. We're seeing where views and lookups and so on and so forth can start coming together. If I was just building this, I'd be going much faster.
Before you go into APIs, one concept that I think would be useful for everyone is the kind of grouping and the expanding, contracting lists. You know, it's it just makes looking at long lists very easy.
100%.
That might be something. And
100%.
it's something we used extensively in the digital planner work.
Amazing. Let's go back quickly and touch on that, and then I'll go into APIs then. So one of the things that Ralph also brought up was this concept of document sets in the digital plan of work. You can call it document sets. Some of our customers call it information management, information packages. So what I'm going to actually do is I'm just going to demonstrate that very quickly. Because that will be I can do I do that? I'll do that very quickly. Information packages. I'm going to give this a name. Again, I'm going to be quite crude right now, and I'm just going to call it. Maybe Ralph, can you give me like 3 examples of document sets? Okay, I'm going to go with design information. I'm going to go with handover information. And I'm going to go with compliance information.
Glazing package.
Glazing. Okay.
A work package.
Okay. That could be. I'm not fully going into work packages right now. Let's go with it. Let's go with it though. I'm going back to my information delivery plan. I'm going to add an extra column. I'm going to call it information package. I'm going to do a select list. I'm going to select from my information packages. I'm doing a default view. I'm doing the package description. I'm going to keep values up to date for now. And then I'm just going to select some values here for randomly for a second. Okay, the next thing that I'm going to do is I want to go back to my TIDP and I want to unhide the information package that we've just added. And I'm going to group by this column. And my architect doesn't have this as a predefined package. So how do I solve this? Before I do this, I'm just going to add handover information. Oops. I know why this is happening. Let me save it. Refresh. Handover information. Okay, perfect. Now I'm going to group. So what then happens is I can come in as the architect. I completely realize we can have a whole discussion on how we can assign packages to the disciplines, but I'm not going to be covering that today. And you can, I hope you're seeing from the principles I'm covering, like how you can be building more and more relationships and making everything much more intelligent. And if you look at our most sophisticated demonstrator, which I didn't walk through today, it has all of that logic baked in. But for the purposes of this session, what I'm really trying to do is break down key principles more than anything else. So here you can see, in response to what Ralph just asked for, you can see I would initially start by looking at information packages. If I wanted to, for example, see how many rows are filled in for any of these, I can predefine it. So I save this as my initial view. I can save this. And I can, whenever I load this now, I'm always gonna have initially the predefined view with the list of information packages. I can then go in, I'm just gonna fill in my design related information. And this is gonna be serial number 4, and we take it from there. Does that answer that, Rolf?
Yeah, absolutely. I was just making a comment, like Morta's the Revit of data. So you have the model view, the project views, and the sheets, and the fantastic stuff.
100%. And I think just because we're on that, I'm gonna do one more thing just to extend this concept of views a bit further, since we're on it, and then I'm gonna go back to APIs. But that anyways covers reports. So if I wanted to very quickly create a different view of the same data, let's say I wanted to see it in a bar chart, and I wanted to see my label column is my originator code or my information package, just because we just did that. And I wanted my value column to be that. We can see that that information has now been added in. And I now have a different view of the same data. So 100%, like there are many different ways that I can actually view this data, and I can then, as a result, make it more accessible and I can make it more usable. I can do that from a data entry point of view, so people have less, as Ralph mentioned, like sometimes it's so overwhelming if you have to do all of these things at once. Ralph also talked about how it's progressive, so you may want to do a view per stage, for example, and that's what we're seeing. Like there is this false narrative within the industry that an information delivery plan needs to be defined on day 1. That simply isn't the case. What the information delivery plan needs to be defined for, I'm about to start stage 1 or stage 3 or stage 4. I should plan out my deliverables for stage 3 and 4. It is not, and there are dependencies between previous sets of information and those. I cannot be planning out what warranties I'm going to need if I don't know how many assets and equipment I'm going to have within my design. So it's all very progressive in nature. So you could be saying, I'm going to have a view per stage, for example. I'm going to have a view per work package. I'm going to have a view per information type. So I want to only look at things like BIM models and plan these accordingly.
I think just for those that are new to Morta, in a similar way in Revit, where you create these views and then you put like multiple views on a sheet, this bar chart, for instance, can be incorporated into a report document as a view. So, and then, as the bar chart updates, the report will be up to date as well. So tables, bar charts, all these things you're making, all these components you're making can be embedded into reports, because we still have, as an industry, we still have to produce formal reports and BIM execution plans, etc.
100%.
Yeah, it's a very similar concept to those who are working in ARCDOX or Revit, where you first make up the views and then you add the views to an output sheet. And somebody's asking, can you connect it to Power BI? I think you can as well.
Yes, you can. So we may do a session just dedicated on Power BI. I ended up not doing it on Power BI today because I want to be, how do I describe this? I'm not a Power BI expert. So I was like, for the time being for today, it's just easier to do all of these things on the platform. We are seeing so we're not trying to replace, I'm just gonna very quickly digress, and then, because this links into APIs, which I want to make sure I cover, and I don't think we'll be able to do everything we had planned for the day. But as I mentioned, like, we as a company are building what we see as a full-fledged demonstrator. So there are hundreds of things and thousands of things that can be built. Every standardized document or every standardized tracker that you build can be done on the platform over time, from Kobe checkers to that will probably be the one for next time, to building safety compliance, to all of the different documents, to QA, QC trackers, the FMA trackers. Like there is a lot that we can and we are doing. So we're building what we see as a demonstrator, and in many ways, over time, I would love to almost do a hackathon with the community where we go, let's pretend we're building BIM Heroes headquarters. What would that as a project look like? And each person builds their own thing, and like we make it into like the ultimate demonstrator altogether, because we're just scratching the what's it called? Like, we're at the tip of the iceberg here. But within the demonstrator, one of the things we have done is we've built what we see as a Power BI dashboard. We're not trying to replace Power BI as a company. We think for internal purposes, Power BI is the way to go, because we're not a business intelligence tool. So you can see here, I can create this is all reading from Morta's information, delivery plans, and so on and so forth. And you can see I can create all of these different kinds of sophisticated reports. And I do that by reading via API data that's in this Morta table. So it's from multiple tables, but this is the master information delivery plan that's being created in our demonstrator. So you can see how earlier we were looking at something that is simple in many ways. Depending on your level of maturity and where you are in the journey, there are various levels that you can take this. But an information delivery plan over time should connect to things like coast codes, like EIRs, like classifications, like the information package, which we've just seen, and like the CDE, which we're about to do. And then it starts linking to things like how many hours am I meant to have, how many who are the people I'm assigning to this. So this is like, if you were to go for a full-fledged information delivery plan that sits at the core of project controls and commercials and a lot of these like really mission critical processes, that this is an exemplar that we have for how you can unlock that. I hope you can see from what I've been doing today how you would potentially be able to build towards something along these lines. Now, and so I've just touched on Power BI. I've just touched on the ultimate IDP. What I really want to do next is I just want to go back and explore API. I'm not necessarily going to go into APIs like myself, but the fundamentals are the system like ACC has an API, right? A system like ASite has an API. A system like Viewpoint or Revisto, which I think a few people in the community here use, they all have APIs, right? An API basically allows you to interface with the application, right? So I can then extract information from it, or I can push information into it, assuming that the API, like that company's APIs allow that. Now, what you'll see in construction is a lot of the APIs are being created retroactively, which is why they always say, I'm going to release the API. So they've built their system and then they make an API for it, which then allows for this interchange of information to happen between that system and another system. In our case, what we've done is if you go to the integrations page, you can see we have APIDocs. My co-founder Matt always says, our application itself is a consumer of our API. So 90% of the functionality you'll see, some functionality is front-end functionality, but 90% of the functionality you'll see on the platform is accessible via our APIs as well, which then means you can, any of these tables that we were looking at, you can extract information from, and you can take into Power BI, you can take into Revit, you can take into ACC to create placeholders via something like Power Automate, for example, and we can have a whole topic on all of that. And you do that just by simply generating an API key and then using that API key in various systems. Now, the other thing is, obviously, we want you to be able to pull data from systems like Viewpoint, for example, and ACC into the platform. And what we've seen is it takes time, to read these API docs. I wouldn't be able to do that personally myself. I wouldn't be able to go into the API documentation of these different systems, understand how they've structured their data, and so on and so forth. So what we've done is we allow you on a user level. For most of the systems, you can just do that yourself by connecting your account. For ACC, you would not be able to. You need to install an app first. But you'd connect your account to that system. And once you've connected your account to that system, what you can do is extract that data and bring it into Morta. So before I do that, I just want to actually show you something that we've also developed. So one of the things we often see is CDE reports. People need to make reports on their CDEs. So what I'm about to do is I'm going to go, I created the CDE report. I'm just going to say this is 3. I'm now going to go into the table that sits behind this. And you can see we've predefined a list of checks that we're seeing are common from a governance perspective for the CDE in order for it to align with 19650 part 2. Is the file name blank? Is the description blank? Is the file name structure appropriate? So does that meet the convention? Is it following the right project codes? Is it following the right originator codes, and so on and so forth? So we've predefined this in our templates. What we can then do is we can come here and we can sync data from various systems. So what I can do is I can choose, rather than me having to go into the APIs and figure it out, I can say I want to sync a list of all of the documents that have been uploaded into ACC and into Morta. So I can pick the hub, I can pick the project, I can pick my folder, and I can click sync data. What I will do is, depending on the scale of the project, this can take up to an hour in order to fetch all of the data. We're working on some very, very large jobs, and that can initially take some time. But then once the sync is established, currently we're doing it once, we sync it once a day. But you can see what this has done is, first, because we've predefined this template of checks, you can see it's come and done all of these checks, and we can see what's false and what's not. So the file naming convention here isn't being followed correctly in line with 19650. You can then see things like all of the metadata that I have within that. So I'm starting to I'm consuming this data via API. I have a file, a link back to that file, and so on and so forth. Now, what I quickly want to do as a last thing for the day is I want to make a comparison between my information delivery plan and my CDE data, because that's one of the areas that people spend a lot of time on. So I'm going to create a new lookup. So to recap that concept that we went over, I'm going to pick my CDE data table. I'm going to pick my default view. Oh God, am I mapping on file name, or am I mapping on? I think it's file name. Let's swing it. It won't. Anyways, it won't work. But well, let's just do that. File name, CDE document name. CDE, is it CDE document name? Source column. I want source column to be CDE document name. I think this is the right one. Let's give it a try. And I want this to be let's keep it 121. And then what I want to do is I just want to pick up the URL of the file, link, come on, .view link. And I'm going to save this. And of course, I don't have anything in here that I need. Now, I've just picked a random hub, so the data isn't aligned. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go here. Does anyone remember what I used for my relationships? I used CDE document name to match with file name. File name is right. CDE document name, this is not what I want. Oh, damn, I should have picked name. Because my whole ACC isn't set up well. So let's redo this. If I go here, by the way, especially if you're getting the demonstrator, a lot of these things are pre-done, but again, I'm trying more than anything here to go through some concepts. So what I just want to repick, I want the name one. No, this is the target column. And then I want the name. Yeah, we're gonna be fine now. And I want this, and I want to add a new condition, and I want to update my lookup. Okay, amazing. Now, it's still not going to match because we don't have a file name there in the CDE itself. Like we haven't configured ACC correctly as a company. So what I'm just going to do is I'm going to disable my formula. I'm going to take some names, and I'm going to, I think Ralph may have caused me a problem because he asked for us to be electrocuted. Did he? No, but I did it in the other one. Okay, amazing. So I've just pasted in some values that we know are in the ACC. You can now see these links have directly popped up. So I've used my lookup in order to automate my tracking and what I would have there. Now, I can continue this. So I can then go in. Effectively, we have not done my initial really ambitious goal was to explain all of these things and go through building fully the digital plan of work. I would have been able to build a digital plan of work if I didn't talk a lot. I hope the talking was useful. Again, the concept is meant to be educational, but just to do some things very quickly. If I wanted to, I could go information package, which would be documents. I could do MIDP. I could do purposes because I have these. And then let's say the last one that I want for the time being, we're massively reducing this down. I want the CDE data. And what I can then do is I can say, I want my purposes. Uses, I've called it.
I think one of the best ways for anybody to learn anything is through doing. You know, it's rather than having it done for you or watching other people do it. So it's great that you showed the concepts and people, and that you're offering the community a trial so they can go and basically try and do it themselves. We'll make this recording available as well on Dev Heroes, and
yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, I really hope people find this useful. Again, like I think there are a lot of key concepts in here. Obviously, our platform ends up like saving people a lot of time, and you completely automate things like tracking, and you can connect your information and so on and so forth. But really, my goal with these sessions is for them to be educational and for you to take something cool and to start adding value to your day-to-day processes. So just to recap some of the key things, fundamentally, I've just done my reduced version of the plan of work, which is purposes, packages, MIDP, and my CDE data. I've embedded them in here. If I were to go in and make changes in my other sections of my documents, so if I were to take, for example, if I were to take this, for example, and I would say this is a delivery team requirement, and I were to make changes here, all of that would change in my purposes as well. So I can reuse data between all of my different documents. And that then means I'm saving a lot of time as a company and as an individual. But I'm also reducing risk because I don't have to duplicate this information consistently. I can then automate things like my tracking. I can automate my reporting. A lot of these administrative non-value added tasks, I would say, get completely automated over time and very, very quickly. Like you do not actually have to go through all of these steps that I just went through. There is actually, it is much like there are demonstrators. There are a lot of things that are plug and play, like I was showing in the demonstrator. But from the perspective of why we joined this community to begin with, I'm not here to purely sell you, is the key thing. I really do want to be helping in building concepts and awareness of things and ways of thinking that we think will ultimately enable you to solve a lot more problems. So for example, I saw just now there's a conversation around D-routes. One of my hopes in the next session is to start touching on asset data and how we can link it to Revit data, which would be a very different side to everything that we've just discussed today. And but you can see how that concept applies. The moment you've done these two, you may have a Building Safety Act tracker. Again, there are concepts in here that should help you. Building Safety Act, there is compliance, but then there are also fire doors. Fire doors would be more similar to what we're going to do next in the next session with Revit, and so on. So my hope is to help you build up the skills, and some of it is Morta, but it's not all. Morta is actually not that hard to use. It's understanding what is a view, what is a relationship, what is a select list, and changing into thinking in a way like Ralph described it, from the 2D view, which is the Word document and the Excel file, to an information model or a database. Because as you're building that know-how, that's really when you can really fly with the system and touch on solve hundreds and thousands of problems in the industry over time with the toolkit and with the skills and with the know-how and hopefully with our support. So I really, really hope people have found this useful.
I think it's also worth mentioning, Mo, that on BIM Heroes, we're going to be doing a CPD program on data governance with Mo is actually coordinating it, and we have maybe about 20 people that are contributing to that. So look out for that. It's probably going to start in a couple of weeks' time, and that's kind of more the theoretical background on aspects of data governance. So it's going to be an incredible learning this year.
Amazing. Yeah, no, I am again, the whole community is pushing me to try as I'm trying, yeah, we're trying as hard as possible to share what we know, but also to collaborate with everyone else. So again, today, hopefully you've also liked the fact that it's not just me talking to you about a process. I really want the person who understands the process. I'm not an information manager by trade, even though I now have a very deep understanding of the processes, but like Ralph has been doing this for a very, very long time and has like a lot of expertise in this. So thank you very much again, Ralph, for joining the session and for jumping on. It was like also quite relatively like quite short notice, not that you have problems improvising as, as a person, but yeah, thanks a lot for joining us. Thanks for sharing your knowledge, and I hope everyone in the community is finding this useful. So please do let us know if you have feedback. Also, if you have a challenge you want to throw at me, you can be the one of the people who is throwing a challenge at me. So you go, this is something that I have. How do you rethink that process into something like this? And again, hopefully in time I talk less and less and I just focus on the building.
Yeah, fantastic.
Awesome.
Well done, Mo.
Thanks a lot, Ralph. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for being with us for 2 hours. Do give us any feedback that you have, and yeah, the links are there. I look forward to hearing back from you. Do send me an email if you have any questions. Do give us any feedback that you have. Have a really good one.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And